The sky was a bruised canvas over the Red Sea, dense, quiet, and dark. On the deck of the MV Salem Express, the wind had softened to a whisper, carrying the scent of salt and diesel. It was late on the night of December 14th, 1991. The ferry was less than 20 kilometers from its destination, the Egyptian port of Safaga. For the pilgrims on board, most of whom had returned from the Hajj in Mecca, home was just over the horizon. Inside the ferry, the air buzzed with the sounds of settling passengers, rustling prayer robes, clinking teacups, the soft chorus of whispered recitations. Some were asleep already, rocked by the gentle motion of the ship. Others sat up chatting, sharing dates and memories, marveling at the journey they had just completed. Many clutched water from the Zamzam well, or gifts wrapped carefully for waiting relatives. In one dim cabin, a father tucked his son under a frayed wool blanket, pausing to kiss his forehead. In another, a group of women leaned together over a well-worn Quran, mouthing its verses in unison. Down below, men rested on makeshift mats in the cargo hold, their belongings stacked against the walls. Bags of sugar, radios, plastic jugs, old rugs, cartons of cigarettes. Many had traveled for days by bus before even reaching Jeddah, the port from which the Salem Express had departed. This ferry was the final stretch in a long pilgrimage back to the lives they had momentarily stepped away from. But beneath the steady hum of the engines, fate was already shifting. Captain Hassan Moro stood on the bridge, navigating waters he knew well. He had steered this ferry through the Red Sea countless times. He knew its quirks, its moods, its shortcuts. He also knew that tonight, the Salem Express was running behind schedule. Perhaps it was impatience, perhaps confidence bred from repetition. But instead of following the safe, longer route into Safaga's harbor, he veered into a narrow, reef-riddled corridor near Hindman Reef, a decision that would seal the ship's fate. At exactly 11:13 p.m., the bow struck the reef. The sound was unlike anything most aboard had ever heard, a metallic roar, a tearing that reverberated through the hull like thunder underwater. Passengers were jolted from sleep, plates shattered, the lights flickered, then surged. Seconds later, the ferry lurched violently to starboard. What happened next was chaos, confusion that swallowed reason in seconds. In the lower cabins, seawater burst through the floor like a living thing. The car deck, accessible through the forward bow doors, took the brunt of the impact. The doors, meant to be sealed tight, had either failed on impact or hadn't been properly secured. Either way, water poured in with unstoppable force. Within minutes, the car deck was a submerged tomb. Vehicles floated briefly before slamming sideways, colliding with walls, crushing anything in their path. Water rushed through ventilation shafts, stairwells, and cargo holds, dragging bedding, suitcases, sandals, and people into its grasp. A woman opened her cabin door to find a wave swallowing the hallway. Another screamed for her daughter, lost in the rising current. A boy clung to the railing, his fingers white-knuckled, his cries drowned in sirens and metal groans. Those who had made it to the upper deck scrambled for lifeboats, only to find many of them rusted shut, inoperable, or already underwater. The ferry was listing fast, tipping like a dying animal. In the control room, no distress call was sent. There was no time. In just 20 minutes, the Salem Express vanished beneath the surface. Of the estimated 650 to 1,000 people on board, most were gone before help even knew they were missing. The survivors, those few who reached the sea, were battered by waves and stung by fuel and salt. Some clung to debris, a shattered bench, a floating mattress, a wooden crate. In the dark, voices called out, some praying, some screaming names into the wind. Many drowned in silence, their limbs too weak, their lungs already filled. By sunrise, the sea was still again. The Salem Express rested at the bottom, tilted on her starboard side, 30 meters below the surface. Her hull was torn open. Her decks were packed with bodies. Some were still in their beds. Others had been thrown against walls or pinned under debris. In one corridor, a line of passengers lay frozen mid-sprint, drowned as they fled toward a stairwell that no longer led to air. Divers from the Egyptian Navy were the first to descend. What they found stunned even the most seasoned among them. Prayer beads floated like seaweed. Plastic sandals drifted through doorways. A child's backpack swayed at the edge of a bunk. In the mess hall, plates still sat on the tables, untouched. Near the stairwells, they found whole families, arms entwined, faces turned upward. In one cabin, 4 children were huddled in a dry corner, as if sleepwalking into death. And then there was the cargo deck. Twisted metal. Crushed vehicles. Bodies beneath the weight of refrigerators, bags of cement, and steel beams. The wreck had become a mausoleum. In the hours and days that followed, the full scale of the tragedy became murky, not because of confusion, but because of silence. The shipping company offered little comment. Egyptian authorities released no full passenger manifest. Ticket records were incomplete. Many passengers had bought their tickets in cash just hours before boarding. Some had been allowed on unofficially by crew members hoping to pocket a few extra pounds. No one knew exactly how many souls had been aboard. Official figures stated 471 dead, 180 survivors. But survivors themselves reported more. Dozens, even hundreds more, unaccounted for. It's likely the real death toll was somewhere between 600 and 1,000. And yet, outside of Egypt, the story barely made headlines. Why? Because the victims were poor, because they were ordinary, because the world had already turned the page. But for the families left behind, the page never turned. Mothers waited at the docks, their faces stiff with dread. Fathers scanned the faces of survivors arriving by ambulance, hoping for a glimpse of a missing son. A woman arrived at the port with a wedding dress for her daughter, only to learn she'd been among the drowned. In a quiet village outside Cairo, a man kept his son's room untouched, his prayer rug still folded, his Quran bookmarked at the last page he'd read before leaving for Mecca. The emotional toll of the Salem Express was unmatched. Survivors carried not just trauma, but guilt. One man who lived recalled hearing children banging from behind a sealed cabin door, begging for help. He couldn't open it. The screams eventually stopped. Another remembered a woman holding a baby above the rising water, whispering, don't cry," until they both slipped under. There were no answers, only questions. Why wasn't the bow door secured? Why were lifeboats unusable? Why did the captain take the shortcut? Captain Hassan Moro died in the disaster. Some survivors called him a martyr. Others blamed him outright. Without him to explain his decisions, the truth sank with the ship. Years passed. The ferry remained underwater, mostly undisturbed. Some divers visited, but many Egyptian divers refused out of respect. For them, it wasn't a wreck. It was a graveyard. The belongings inside were never retrieved. Neither were most of the bodies. The water around the site is calm now. The fish swim freely through the broken windows. Coral has begun to creep across the rusting walls. In the engine room, gauges still sit frozen. In the cabins, clothing still hangs on hooks, untouched. In the silence, a pair of sandals lie side by side near a cabin door. The Salem Express is a story few want to tell. It lacks a grand villain, a dramatic courtroom, or a ticking clock. It is a story of neglect, of systems too fragile to survive one bad decision, of shortcuts taken because someone thought it would be fine, just this once, and of people who had prayed, sacrificed, and dreamed, only to vanish in the dark because no one planned for the worst. It's not a mystery. It's a lesson, one still rusting beneath the Red Sea. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.